He came in for reflux and nausea. That's how he said it, like he was apologizing for taking up space. Like he had brought the emergency room the most boring problem on earth. He kept one hand pressed high on his upper abdomen, right where people point when they say, heartburn, and the other hand tightened around his phone as if it could anchor him. His name was Raphael, 48, the kind of man who moved fast even when he was sitting still. He'd eaten late. He'd slept badly. He'd lived on coffee and willpower for so long that discomfort had become background noise. Tonight, though, the noise was louder. "It's burning," he said. "And I feel sick. Like, nauseated. I think it's reflux." The triage area was bright in a way that made him feel even more exposed. He answered questions. He tried to be precise. But in moments like this, people don't describe symptoms the way textbooks do. They describe them the way fear allows. So he didn't say, pressure. He said, burning. He didn't say, tightness. He said, indigestion. He didn't say, I'm scared. He said, it's probably nothing. He waited, watching the clock, watching other patients, watching his own body for signals he could trust. Every few minutes, the nausea rolled through him again, heavy, whole-body nausea, not the kind that feels like a stomach bug. His mouth went dry. His skin looked slightly gray under fluorescent lights. But he could still talk. He could still walk. And because he could still function, his brain kept trying to downplay it. When he was finally seen, the conclusion came quickly. Reflux is common. Stress is common. Nausea is common. A burning sensation in the upper abdomen is so common that it practically has its own parking spot in the waiting room. He left with antacid advice and reassurance. He tried to feel grateful. He even felt a little embarrassed, because for a moment, after he got home and sat very still, it eased. Not gone, but quieter. Like whatever was happening had decided to give him a break. He took that as proof he'd overreacted. But the most dangerous medical mysteries don't announce themselves. They borrow the mask of something ordinary and wait for you to get comfortable. Raphael went through the motions of a normal night. He took a sip of water. He loosened his belt. He told himself he would eat clean tomorrow. And then the discomfort returned with an edge that didn't match reflux. It wasn't just burning anymore. It was a thick, upper-abdominal pressure, high, close to the lower chest, like something had settled there and refused to move. And the strangest part was the way it responded to his body. When he stood up to walk to the kitchen, it got worse. When he sat back down, it softened. He didn't notice the pattern at first. Most people don't. The human brain loves simple explanations, and reflux is a simple explanation. But as the minutes passed, the pattern became harder to ignore, because it had been there earlier too, quietly, all day. When he carried a box at work, the heartburn showed up. When he climbed a few stairs, the heartburn tightened. When he stopped and rested, it eased just enough for him to forget it again. That's the first clue. And it's the kind of clue that can save a life, because discomfort that reliably worsens with exertion and eases with rest is not how reflux usually behaves. It's how an oxygen problem behaves. He didn't want to believe that. Nobody does. He wanted a stomach explanation. He wanted a harmless story. He wanted to take a pill and move on. Then the second clue arrived without asking permission. A cold sweat broke across his forehead and the back of his neck. Not the sweat of a warm room, not the sweat of exercise, this was different. It was the sweat that makes you feel suddenly fragile. His breathing became shallow, as if his lungs refused to fill all the way. He swallowed and tasted something metallic, or maybe that was just panic trying to take control. He told himself it was anxiety. He almost convinced himself. Anxiety can imitate a lot. But anxiety doesn't usually line up perfectly with exertion, pressure, sweat, and breathlessness like pieces of the same puzzle. And then came the third clue, the one that doesn't hurt until it matters. Risk. Raphael had spent years stacking small risks like papers on a desk. He didn't call them danger, he called them life. A family history he tried not to think about. Blood sugar that ran high more often than it should. A smoking history filed under, "I quit." An age that quietly moved him into a category he didn't want to belong to. None of those things felt urgent. Until tonight. He tried one more antacid because that's what people do when they're frightened, they repeat the last instruction they were given. He waited for the familiar relief. He didn't get it. Instead, the pressure seemed to climb, upward, from the upper abdomen into the lower chest, like a heavy hand moving into a more serious territory. His nausea thickened. His breath tightened. And somewhere beneath the symptoms, a new sensation formed, an unmistakable feeling that something was wrong in a way he couldn't explain. This is where the twist begins, because the twist isn't a plot device. It's physiology. It's the moment the body stops whispering and starts demanding attention. Raphael looked at his car keys on the counter and thought, I can just drive back. It's 10 minutes. I'll be fine. But something inside him resisted that idea, an instinct he hadn't listened to earlier. His hands were slightly shaky. His skin was still damp. And the pressure wasn't fading, it was consolidating, becoming more certain. He picked up his phone and called someone he trusted, because the safest decision he made all night was this: he stopped trying to be alone with a potentially life-threatening mystery. As he spoke, the person on the other end heard it, the shortness of breath that Raphael himself was still trying to deny. They told him, clearly, not to drive. They told him to sit down. They told him to call emergency services if it intensified. Raphael tried to protest. He didn't want to be that person. He didn't want to be dramatic. He didn't want to admit that the heartburn was starting to feel like something with teeth. And then, as if his body was tired of waiting for permission, another wave hit. The room tilted. His vision sharpened in a weird way, like the world had become too bright. The cold sweat returned, heavier. He gripped the edge of the chair, breathing shallow, and in that moment he understood the most frightening truth of the night. This wasn't behaving like reflux. And when reflux doesn't behave like reflux, time matters. The call connected faster than he expected, and that alone should have told him something, because emergencies have a way of rearranging priorities in the world around you. Raphael tried to speak normally. He tried to sound like a man with heartburn. But his voice kept catching, and every sentence ended a little too soon, as if his lungs were rationing air. The dispatcher asked questions that felt uncomfortably direct. Where is the discomfort? Does it feel like burning, pressure, tightness? Did it start suddenly or build over time? Is there shortness of breath? Sweating? Nausea? Lightheadedness? Does it get worse with movement? Any pain traveling to the arm, jaw, neck, or back? Any history of diabetes, smoking, high blood pressure, family heart disease? Raphael answered, and with each answer the story transformed, from a stomach complaint into something that could not be safely minimized. He didn't realize that his words were building a picture until the dispatcher's tone shifted from neutral to urgent. Stay seated. Don't drive. Help is on the way. Those words have weight when you're trying to convince yourself you're fine. They feel like a door closing behind you, forcing you to look at what's in front of you. Raphael sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, hands clasped together like he was praying without meaning to. He focused on the simplest task: breathe in, breathe out. The pressure in his upper abdomen and lower chest did not stab. It pressed. It crowded. It felt like something deep inside was bracing itself, tightening in slow increments. He thought about reflux again because reflux was comforting. Reflux was familiar. Reflux meant discomfort, not danger. But the symptoms kept refusing to play the reflux role. They didn't flare after a spicy meal and disappear after a pill. They rose and fell with exertion. They came with cold sweats. They came with a breathlessness that made him feel as if he were breathing through fabric. And then there was the nausea, persistent, inexplicable, almost chemical, like his body was trying to purge a threat it couldn't name. A few minutes later, there was a knock. Paramedics. Their presence instantly changed the room, as if someone had lowered the ceiling and turned up the seriousness. Raphael tried to sit up straighter, to look less sick. He didn't want pity. He didn't want to be scolded for calling. He wanted them to tell him it was reflux so he could laugh and apologize. But they didn't treat it like reflux. They asked him to describe the sensation again, and this time, with the pressure rising and the sweat returning, he couldn't keep using gentle language. He said the word he'd avoided, pressure. He said it felt heavy, high, and wrong. He admitted that exertion made it worse. He admitted he had felt short of breath. He admitted the nausea felt out of proportion. They moved quickly without panicking him. They placed monitors, checked vitals, listened. One of them kept eye contact with him the way you do when you want someone to stay present, to stay with you. This is the part the public rarely sees. In real life, the most dangerous moment isn't always collapse. Sometimes it's ambiguity, when you're still awake, still speaking, still capable of doubting yourself. An ECG was done. A small, quick test that can change everything. Raphael watched their faces the way people do, trying to read the verdict before it's spoken. He saw the brief, practiced exchange between them, subtle, but unmistakable. The kind of silent communication that says, "This is not something we ignore." They didn't tell him a dramatic story in the living room. They didn't label it with certainty on the spot. They did what matters in emergencies. They treated the possibility as real enough to act on. Because the central mystery of this case is not just, why did heartburn happen? It's, why can indigestion be the first warning sign of something life-threatening? The answer sits in the uncomfortable truth about acute coronary syndromes. Heart problems don't always announce themselves as classic, crushing chest pain. The heart and the upper abdomen share nerve pathways that can blur the message. The body can translate cardiac distress into pressure, nausea, reflux-like burning, fatigue, sweating, and breathlessness. The sensation can land in the chest, in the stomach, in the jaw, in the back, in the arm, or nowhere you expect it. That's why atypical symptoms are so dangerous. They don't feel like the story people think they're supposed to feel. Raphael's heartburn was not a misunderstanding of his body. It was his body speaking in a dialect he hadn't been taught to recognize. In the ambulance, the movement made everything sharper. The pressure pulsed with each bump in the road. He tried to keep breathing evenly, but his chest felt tight, like the air didn't want to settle. One paramedic talked to him continuously, asking him to rate the discomfort, asking if it was spreading, asking if he felt dizzy. The other watched the monitor with the kind of attention that makes you realize your life is now a set of numbers. Raphael stared at the ceiling and felt the strange, surreal regret that comes with nearly missing the point earlier. He thought of the clinic visit. He thought of the antacid advice. He thought of the phrase, "It's probably reflux," and he understood how easy it is to accept the simplest narrative when you want it to be true. At the hospital, everything moved faster. Doors. Lights. A bed that seemed to glide down a corridor. Voices that didn't waste time. People who had seen this pattern enough times to respect it. More questions. More monitoring. Blood tests designed to detect heart muscle injury. Repeat ECGs. Observation that was anything but passive. Because in true cardiac events, the difference between scary and catastrophic is often measured in time. And this is the twist that turns the case into a lesson. Reflux doesn't usually behave like this. Reflux doesn't track with exertion. Reflux doesn't come with cold sweats and shortness of breath and a heavy, pressing malaise that feels systemic. Reflux may be miserable, but it doesn't usually make the body act as if it's fighting for oxygen. Raphael had come in earlier with a story that sounded harmless. Now the same symptoms, with the pattern fully visible, sounded like something else entirely. He didn't need a dramatic chest-clutching moment to be in danger. He needed one thing: for someone to recognize the red flags and move before the clock ran out. In the hours that followed, Raphael learned what most people only learn when it's too close: medicine isn't always about obvious symptoms. It's about patterns. It's about probabilities. It's about respecting the body when it breaks character. The team didn't tell him a single, neat sentence like, "This is definitely a heart attack," the moment he arrived, because responsible care doesn't always work like that. What they did do was treat him as someone who could be in the middle of an acute coronary syndrome, an emergency spectrum that can include unstable angina and heart attack, especially when symptoms are atypical and the risk profile is real. And Raphael's risk profile was real. He wasn't a teenager with heartburn after pizza. He was 48 with a history that mattered, blood sugar issues that never felt urgent until they were, a smoking history he'd tried to forget, a family story that sounded vague until you realize how often heart problems is code for an early warning that wasn't heard in time. The tests began to build a clearer picture. Monitoring showed that his body wasn't simply uncomfortable, it was under strain. The clinicians were listening for what the stomach story couldn't explain. They were looking for signs that the heart muscle had been deprived of oxygen long enough to start leaving fingerprints in the blood and in the electrical patterns of the heart. And while he waited, Raphael experienced something almost everyone experiences in that setting: the urge to rewrite the past. The urge to go back to the first visit and choose different words. The urge to say, "It gets worse when I exert myself." The urge to admit the cold sweat. The urge to admit the breathlessness. The urge to confess that the nausea felt wrong, not just annoying. Because that is the true hinge of this case. The mystery wasn't that he had reflux symptoms. The mystery was why those reflux symptoms didn't behave like reflux, and why that matters. When discomfort is linked to exertion, you pay attention. When rest relieves it, you pay even closer attention. When the body adds cold sweat, shortness of breath, faintness, confusion, or radiating pain, you stop trying to be brave and start trying to be safe. Raphael's night could have ended in a quiet tragedy: a man who was told to treat heartburn at home, who did exactly what he was told, and who never got the chance to tell anyone that the symptoms had changed. That's why "time matters" is not a slogan in these cases. It's physics. It's biology. It's muscle. In the end, the final interpretation was consistent with what the pattern had been pointing toward all along: a cardiac event presenting in an atypical way, upper abdominal pressure that felt like heartburn, nausea that felt like indigestion, sweating and breathlessness that felt like anxiety, until it finally became too loud to ignore. And here's the part that turns this into a viewer's takeaway without turning it into panic: most heartburn is not a heart emergency. But some heart emergencies borrow the sensation of heartburn to slip past your defenses. So the question becomes, how do you tell when reflux deserves urgent attention? Not by guessing. Not by waiting for the perfect symptom. By noticing red flags. If you ever feel chest pressure or severe upper abdominal pressure paired with shortness of breath, fainting, confusion, a cold sweat, unexplained nausea, or pain spreading to the arm, jaw, back, or neck, especially if it worsens with exertion, seek emergency evaluation immediately. And if symptoms are severe, don't drive yourself. Call for help and use emergency services. While you're waiting for help, focus on first aid basics that prioritize safety. Keep the person seated or lying in a comfortable position. Loosen tight clothing. Keep them calm and still. Don't force food or drink. If they become unresponsive and are not breathing normally, start CPR if you know how and follow dispatcher instructions until help arrives. Because sometimes the difference between "I'll sleep it off" and "I'm glad I'm still here" is one decision made in time. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more diagnostic file mystery stories.